Hey, book besties. Welcome to More Than a Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Leyna.
And I'm your other host, LJ.
And we're here today with Sarah Damoff, author of one of the best books I've read this year, The
Me
Bright
too.
Years. It was so good, so emotional. It's one of those books that I was like, I'm glad I have some Kleenex nearby at the end. But
thank you guys for having me today. And thank you for those kind words about the book.
No, we're so excited to talk about it with you.
Me too.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, like how you got, maybe like,
Okay.
I mean, if you have another career and maybe how it transitioned to writing.
Yes. So my background is social work. I've worked with foster families and foster children since I was a 17-year-old volunteer, and then just off and on over the years in multiple different roles. I worked in residential treatment. My husband and I were foster parents for a while. And then I worked for about 7 years on the court side of things, which is what I was doing when I journeyed into fiction writing. So it looks like it came out of nowhere. I've always loved reading and writing, but that's it. I didn't have any formal education or training or even childhood dreams of becoming an author, but a lot of it had to do with my interest in families. I had read another novel called Lost Children Archive.
I have that. I haven't read it, but I have it.
Hey, I feel like not as many people have heard of it, but it was that book for whatever reason. And it sounds so obvious to say, but that book, reading about a family where the central storyline is the family, but in the background, in that book, it's the crisis at the southern border, but it was just sort of a justice related child issue. And that's what I've always been interested in. And so for some reason, that was just reading that novel to me was like, oh, I could write about anything with fiction. Like anything you're interested in, you could do. And she wrote that book so artfully. And so I loved the overlap of this issue sort of thing that I was interested in, but then doing it in such a way that is artful. And I think novels and fiction can really reach people in ways that stories can reach people in ways that nothing else can. That being said, I had one manuscript before I wrote The Bright Years, and I tried to really write about the child welfare system, and I had never done any project like that, but I was just experimenting. I think it was the day I turned the last page of Lost Children Archive. I was super inspired, and I just was like, I'm going to try this. And fictionalizing also helped me with, a lot of the families I'd worked with. Those stories are confidential. So just creating fictional characters and fictional worlds based on some of what I had witnessed and the emotional seeds that had been planted in me working with families for so long. Anyways, the first manuscript I tried had too much agenda, I think, for a novel. I was really trying to educate people. I had really gotten on that. I'd really latched onto that idea that I can talk about this through fiction, but I was talking about it too much for it to be good fiction, if that makes sense. So I kind of set that aside. And after a little while, I was still had the writing bug. I was still like, well, I'm going to try again. And on a blank page, I opened up my computer and I just was like, my only agenda is to tell a beautiful family story. And I had no other message I wanted to get across or themes I wanted to tackle. I knew the title, which at the time was The Bright Letters, because I drafted it in letters. And then I knew the final scene and I didn't know anything else. And that was in late 2021. So that was when, what became The Bright Years was started. And I was still working part-time with foster families through the time when I sold that book to Simon & Schuster at the end of 2023.
Cool.
So you finished it in 2021 and then
I started it in 2021. I did finish the first draft. I'm a pretty fast drafter, but then I set it aside. At the time, I had absolutely no understanding of or connections to the publishing world. So that was a big part of the journey itself. Once I came back to the manuscript, I would say was the following summer. And I really seriously started researching and learning about how do I do this with edits and with pursuing an agent and then an acquiring editor at a publishing house. And it's, a whole other thing. You've got the
It
writing
is.
and you've got the publishing. And
It's almost like a separate industry in itself. Like
absolutely.
you're a writer, but then you also have to be able to
Yes.
market your book and put it
Yes.
out
Yes.
there.
Yes. And again, with no connections and no background, so to speak, in writing, I was just cold pitching literary agents and really fortunate for the journey that I had in that. And from my understanding, if you're not familiar with the whole world of it, it sounds like a long journey, but most writers that I tell, they're like, oh, that's fast because it's just a long process, no matter what, how you do it or what you do or what path you take. And traditional is maybe the longest in terms of like self-publishing or other options there might be. They all take time, and traditional maybe takes the longest.
And I first heard about the Bright Years. I was listening to the What Should I Read Next podcast. I don't know
Oh,
if you've ever heard
yeah.
the Anne
Yes.
Vogel.
Yes, I love
I've
her.
listened to that like forever. Love that. And she does the summer reading guide every year. And she did like a snippet of like, here's a sneak peek of the summer reading guide. And The Bright Years was the very first book she talked about. And she was talking about it, that it's like a family generational saga and that it's, based in Texas. And I was like, ooh, that sounds really good. And so I wrote it down. I was walking my dog, leash in one hand, walking
Yes.
and taking notes on my phone in the other. And I was like, I got to remember that book. And then I was at Neighbor Books for a book club there.
Yes.
And the owner, Joey, was talking about the next month's pick. And he was like, well, I was thinking about this book, The Bright Years, and we're going to have, Sarah come out and do a signing and a Q&A. And he was like, I thought it would be fun to do the book and then have the Q&A, meet the author. And I was like, okay, so that's the second time that I've heard about this book. And then I picked it up that night and I started just looking through it and I'm like, we have to have you on. So I was
I
very
love
glad
it.
you were able to.
Yeah.
I love it. I've heard that it takes like 7 times of seeing a book or hearing about a book before someone will be like, okay, I need to buy this. That's the average number. I don't know who comes up with that or how, but I've heard that multiple times that it just.
I'm easily persuaded
Yeah.
when it comes to buying books. So
Same. Well, and then I had not heard of it, and then Leyna was telling me about it. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm down. I mean, you don't have to convince me to read much. I mean, there are certain things, like I'm not really a fan of supernatural scary books. I like scary horror, but not ghosts too much. Small doses. But I am so glad that she did. Like she said, like I've read, let me see how many books I've read this year. I've read a lot more lately, Lane. I finished a lot more. I might have had started them. I have now read 56 books. This is book 56 for me. And I would say it is top 2 for this year alone.
Thank you.
And I can't stop thinking about it anyway. I just had to
I'm so glad.
throw that in there. I think it's just so beautiful. And I know you talked a little bit about how your background with social work helped, but this is really a book about a family. And so like there's a very heavy topic. I don't know what we're revealing. Because I also go into books blindly. So I don't ever read like what is given away. And then I'm like, I should probably know what it says. But there is a pretty big generational trauma that goes through. Is that more from like your social work background, or do you have any like experience in your own life from maybe family members? I'm just curious about that. I come from a family. I mean, I guess this will kind of I come from a family of addiction and alcoholism, and including a parent. And so a lot of that stuff really resonated with me because I've definitely seen how someone can be so absent. And like the older I get, the more I'm like, okay, but it is, maybe this is not like an intentional thing. But anyway, so your turn to talk.
and I have a sibling with alcoholism, so it resonated very
with
much
us.
resonated with both of us.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I don't think talking about alcoholism and addiction is a spoiler. If it is, then every single other conversation I've had.
I mean, it's such a huge part, and it is something that makes it so relatable. Yeah.
Yes. That's a great question, and it's always first of all, I'll just say it's so common that so many people who read it are telling me, how they relate and how it's in their family. And I experienced that some in the process of writing as I reached out to speak with people, but certainly since it was published, just the prevalence of this issue is huge. So I always have this mixed feeling of, I'm so sorry that you could relate.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that the characters were resonant and that they were
Mhm.
true to life, because that was my hope. I do not have personal experience in my own family or home with alcohol or addiction. I do with some of the other themes that come up in the book. And substance abuse certainly is huge in child welfare. It's one of the main reasons, other than poverty, that families are broken up for however long. So again, I had no agenda, but I knew just if I try to write about a family, my
Mhm.
write a beautiful story about a family, a broken family searching for meaning and hope, that some of the things I've witnessed and been around, and some of the most common experiences. And again, like I said, this is such a prevalent issue.
Mhm.
I will say the book, again, I mentioned it started as letters, and it was letters between mother and daughter. And Ryan, so our main characters, I guess I should say for the listeners,
Yes.
Ryan and Lillian get married and have a daughter, Georgette. And those are our 3 points of view. They're not alternating. So we first hear from Lillian for almost half the book, and then we hear from Georgette as she comes of age, and then we hear from Ryan for the final section of the book. So Ryan was not going to be a main character, and now he's very central, and he is our character who struggles with alcoholism as his dad did before him. I started having Lillian write to her daughter, Georgette, about who her father was and that he had left them. And as I began writing that, it was like he was tapping me on the shoulder saying, that's too stereotypical. You're making me too flat. I've got more of a story. Give me a voice. Give me more complexity. And so I never set out to write about addiction. I never set out to make that a big theme. And I'm so grateful for the way his character kind of revealed himself to me in so that I was able to explore that. And I kind of mentioned I had people that I interviewed and spoke to, and I felt so honored and humbled that the people who shared their stories of their own struggles and sobriety, and people in their families loving someone with alcohol dependence. And I just felt like I wanted to take that to the page and try to do justice to just the holistic human experience of that particular struggle. So a lot comes into it, and again, this book, there's no characters, not based on any one person or any one family, but that's how fiction works, is I'm bringing to it everything I've, been able to witness, to experience, to hear about, and then letting my imagination take it from there to hopefully fully form a character. The last thing I'll say about the development of Ryan and that particular issue of alcoholism and addiction, once I realized he was going to be a bigger character than I had imagined, I did think of a friend of mine, and I named him after this friend, Ryan. We grew up together. His father struggled with drug addiction, and his biggest fear as a child was becoming an addict. And his story was very tragic in that he passed away from it in his early 20s, and he left behind a young daughter. And so once I'm like, and I think that maybe was somewhere, in the back of my heart as I was trying to write this dad figure off the page. It was just like that's not, it was a subtle shift for me. However defensible or not defensible it is, this shift from him having left them because he didn't care about them to him leaving them because he does, and he's scared of himself. And it's just more complicated than I originally imagined. And some of that I think had to do with just having witnessed so many families, and then a personal friend of mine go through that from childhood to
Yeah.
adulthood, and how the generational impact is real.
It is real. And I have to say that the characters were all very complex. It was, Ryan's not the only one that has a secret.
Both Ryan and Lillian's struggles are listed in the book blurb, because you have to know a little bit about what you're getting into and what you're going to read.
Mhm.
And what are these things that the family's going through. So do we want to say what Lillian's?
You can, yeah,
Sure,
we
go
can,
for it.
yeah.
Say it real
So
fast.
within the first maybe 30 pages, we find out that
Yeah.
she had a child before she met Ryan, a son who she placed for adoption. And she doesn't share this with Ryan. So they both enter the marriage with some struggles. Ryan is not drinking at the time, but when he starts drinking, he kind of hides that from her.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting to look at their character growth and just seeing them. You see them at first and they're just this happy couple and everything's great. And then kind of these cracks start to show.
Mhm.
And a lot of it, I feel like it was their shame they were hiding because
Mm-hmm.
Lillian was ashamed of the fact that she had a child and gave it away. Not only that she had a child, but she still thinks about this baby and wonders what happened to him. And, Ryan, it has so much shame with not only his own drinking, but I think there was probably a lot of shame with his father's drinking and the way that his relationship with what was with him. And we see that pretty early on when Ryan helps a gentleman and buys
Right.
him food. And
Right.
you can see that he is very empathetic. He does care about that, but he doesn't have a relationship with his own father, but he's trying to fulfill that in some way. Or, he's very multifaceted. And I think one of the lines that in the book, I wrote it down, abuse is much easier to identify when it's not in your own kitchen. And that line just struck a chord with me because it's so easy to be like, oh, someone should leave this relationship because X, Y, and Z. And it's a
From the
totally
outside.
different thing
Mm-hmm.
whenever
Mhm.
you're living it and you love that person and you're like, how do I extricate myself without, cutting off? I mean, Lillian and Ryan is a perfect example because Lillian has formed this relationship with Ryan's mother too.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
so I'm sure there was, in my head, I was seeing her struggle with if I
Yes.
leave him, I'm also
Mhm.
leaving her.
Yes. We could talk so much about her character. And the book, the very beginning of the book, the prologue opens with Ryan as a child, and his mother, Elise, is taking him away from her husband, Ryan's father, who is alcoholic and abusive. And maybe it's fair to say he's not on the page as much. And he kind of is I mean, all we see of him is pretty awful in the way he treats them. But Elise is choosing basically her son over her husband.
Yes.
And then when Ryan and Lillian enter this truly loving marriage, what happens so often, people get married young, and then as they grow and as they start their own family, there are things that come up from their own childhoods, and if they don't have the tools to deal with those things, it can put a strain on the relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
that begins to happen, and it begins to come to light for Elise. She has such a complicated relationship with it all because her son, who she loves, who she has a good relationship, she was a single mom to him. They're very close. But then she also loves Lillian, her daughter in law, and Georgette, her granddaughter, and she doesn't want him to hurt them. So she has her loyalties are spread around, and it's really fascinating to watch their dynamics and that relationship. And she's not a perfect character, but she's very loyal, and she does a lot that shows a lot of strength.
Mm-hmm.
There were several moments where I was very happy for her and proud of her and being
Mhm.
like, okay, good job setting that boundary,
Mhm.
And
Right.
I know that has to be hard, from a family of addiction, being able to set those boundaries and stick to them. And she did a very good job with
Mhm.
that. I really appreciated that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I loved, there's so much like that y'all were just talking about that. I'm like, there's so many things I want to comment on. But yes, I really appreciated that his mom was like, it wasn't a surprise that her son, started drinking too and kind of was following a patch, starting to lead the direction of his dad. I think that was very good that she was not in denial. Like she knew it was a possibility. And I agree about that. If you don't have tools to work through things, then you're going to bring that into your relationship. Might not come out for years, but things definitely do. And I do think seeing how he was with his dad and how his dad was, I can say in different seasons, I kind of like my dad has not been abusive to he's had anger issues and stuff. I mean, not saying he never punched walls, multiple of them and things like that, but thankfully he was not physically abusive to
Mhm.
anyone, and thankfully both my mom and my stepmom did not stay. Like they exited the relationships as soon as things got bad, which I really we my brothers and I are both very lucky because of that. And I think also we see that with Lillian as well. Like
Mhm.
or even Ryan took himself out of the situation. But
Yeah. It's interesting because kind of what you were saying earlier about the abuse is much easier to recognize when it's not in your own kitchen. Also true with alcohol. A ways into the book, after their marriage has already gone through this, where Lillian says something to him about being an alcoholic, and it's really the first time that label, that term, is put on him, and he kind of just has this double take. He's like, oh, I guess that is what I am. I mean, like, he has to think about it.
Right.
And I think it's these abuse and alcohol, they're so easy to see from the outside because it might be all we're seeing and we put it in a box as an observer. But when you're living it, you have such a big percentage of the time that is not those things. That is not
Yes.
drinking. That is not abuse. And in that entire percentage of time, you can downplay to yourself, if it's a problem. And in Lillian's case, it is interesting because unlike his own dad, Ryan was never putting his hands on them.
No.
But as he, like you mentioned, punching a wall and things like that, as he begins to kind of get like that when
Yes.
he's drinking, he removes himself because
Yes, which is good.
so that has to do with his anger at his own father. And he's, in a way, it's like he's trying to prove that he's not his dad, but then he's going down the same path. And I think
Right.
that's where he just feels like a complete failure, and he kind of gives himself over to it. And however much of that is a choice or not, I don't fully understand, how I've never had the disease myself, but they certainly see it as him making a choice. And there was a great tension between, something that was so apparent to me and everyone I spoke to and all the families I've worked with is that the love and the affection don't just disappear. The good memories don't just
No,
disappear. The
they don't.
laughter, that's all still there, and they still love him, but everyone's trying to protect each other, protect the family. And so it's just an interesting dynamic and dance that they have to do through the seasons of.
And Lillian, I think she was a great mother. She did a really good job of protecting Jet. And I think that, she had some resources. She had Ryan's mom there to help. And then she had her friend Shauna, which I loved
I
Shauna's
love them
character.
too.
Yeah, we
I
have
was
to
like,
have
I love
found
you.
family when our actual biological families aren't really showing up.
And Lillian, I thought this was really interesting. Her mother had died of cancer, and then a few years later, her father died after getting hit by a drunk driver. So you have this dynamic also where Lillian has lost someone that she really cared about, her father, to a drunk driver, and then she's now married to someone who does this. And like that complicated relationship there too. Like you can love someone and hate them at the same time and hate their
And yes,
choices.
I think there's a line in the book about that where she's
Yeah.
like, I'm really trying to hate him. And I do hate him, but I also love him. It's very complicated and feeling like he's different people almost.
I feel the same way, like as having kind of been the Jet character in my own life,
Right.
and seeing that. I love the complexity of that because of all of her feelings, because I feel in a way I was sheltered from it until I didn't really like there were a lot of things that didn't make sense until I asked the right question to get the right answer.
Right.
And then it's like you can see your past in 2020. And I really love the complexity of the emotions because I still think that I do deal with that in a lot of ways, because I did have a few years where my dad would not even respond to a text message. And then my grandmother had a fall and ended up passing away, and we've reconnected. And so now it's like a month text, but it's still, like we're not going to have the close relationship that a normal relationship would have, but I get all those feelings of like, I've had that where I'm like, no, he's not in my life anymore. I'm not going to do that. To where, okay, you know what? He is an old man. I don't think he doesn't love me. I just think he does not.
He couldn't.
He can't even take care of
do it well.
himself.
Yeah.
Like he's living with his 80-something-year-old father who is the reason he has a home. Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
And so all of that. And so that I just love how well that dynamic of the going back and forth and the feelings and then the blaming, and then also like, but still having the hope that things will be better, and just still rooting for them even when you don't want to root for them, and even though it could be a disappointment. But you did it so well for someone who hasn't
Yeah.
personally been in her shoes. Like, I felt like this was very like, I was like, I just like, she has to know. You have to know.
Yeah.
So anyway, so there you go.
Thank
But
you
anyway,
for
you had a
saying that.
question, Lena.
No, I appreciate that because in writing Georgette over so many years, we see her from birth through
Mhm.
adulthood. And there are those seasons with her dad as well, just completely no relationship and then some relationship. And it's all just up and down. And as a child, there's a part of you that always wants something, I mean, it's
Mhm.
and
Your parent.
so much of the book, I think the heart of it is that slow discovery of who our parents are as people. And that's what Georgette is having to do. And that was my original conceit was, Lillian has this daughter. And I think that's part of why she's such a good mom to Georgette. I mean, I think, she could be a good mom without this, but she has this guilt in a way
Mhm.
of having not been able to raise the first baby that she had. And she's really just putting Georgette as her top priority, and she wanted to, the first conceit of the book was that she was going to want to tell her about her history and who she is. And it's not everybody has children, but everyone has parents. We're born into some context we have
Mhm.
no control over. And at some point, as we come of age, we start to understand they were alive before I was. And they have, who are
They
they?
had a past, they had
And
secrets, they had a
right.
life.
And again, like this is a question that's posed in the book. What's the difference between an excuse and a reason? And as a
Mhm.
social worker with families, I think of this all the time because I'm like, when do they cross this imaginary line from being a victim as a child to being an adult with agency who has to take responsibility? And maybe even if they had cards stacked against them as a child, that still doesn't excuse them hurting other people when they get older. And yes, like we mentioned before, some people just need more tools because they've come from a harder place. And I think the hope with any kind of generational trauma like that is just, it's never going to not be there, but is just that there's some
Mhm.
improvement and some progress in the next generation. And I always like to say to Ryan's defense, in the story of the Brights, he did do better by his family than his dad
He
did.
He
did.
did. He
Um,
did. And I like that word that you used with the agency stuff, because obviously coming from a family of addiction, and I have two brothers, and like we all dealt with that differently. Now, I might be the oldest, but my middle brother is the one who saw more. He was
mm,
exposed to more than I was at an older age. And so for me though, once I found out, I've just had that personality where I'm like, okay, well, if that's not something I should do, then I'm not going to do it. So like to this day, I've not ever tried illegal drugs in any capacity. Like I've not even pot. I've never tried anything. And people are just flabbergasted by that. Like, but I really didn't, because I knew, like, my dad, as much as they say you can't get addicted to that, my dad, that was his drug of choice that he had every single day for many years, and it impacted his life.
yeah,
So when you see that and you're like, okay, well, most people, maybe it's not a big deal. It might be for us.
right.
And then my middle brother, he was like, he's like, okay, like I think he's tried things, but then he was like, I really don't want to mess with that. I don't want to do that. And then the younger one, he kind of like realized he had more of that addictive personality. But the fact of the matter is, we're like, we don't want to ruin our lives. We
Yeah,
don't want to become that parent. We don't want to see someone who had an amazing career throw it all away
right.
because of these choices. And so, you know, at least hearing you say that, like, that gives me hope. Like, we had more tools, we had more resources. We
Mhm.
did not allow ourselves to become victims, even though there are moments where we feel like victims, obviously. But
Mhm.
I like the way you said that, because I think there's still a fear for me. My kids are 19 and 15, but I've always tried to be really open and honest, and like, and then tried to keep that communication open. Okay, if you do something, like, you can still come to me, I will rescue you, whatever. But yeah, I think
The
you're totally
openness
right.
is so helpful. I think the
Mhm.
secrets oftentimes are what lead to the spiral
Mhm.
because,
Yes.
Ryan isn't going to say this is a problem for me once he starts drinking because that's when he's so ashamed. He's like
Yeah.
not wanting to even admit to himself, I kind of need this, or I kind of
Mhm.
feel bad if I need another drink, or I need a morning
Mhm.
drink. And it's just so awful for him to admit it because of the shame. And, when Jet gets older and she says something about, I'm never going to drink, Lillian
Mhm.
almost cautious, she's kind of
Yeah.
like, that's good resolve, but you should know your dad said the same thing.
Right.
And it's almost this like, de-romanticize this idea. Like, it's not always that easy. And so if it does happen and you have a drink, you can talk about it. You can
Right.
still stop. It doesn't have to become the secret. The fact of it being a secret just makes things so much
Right.
bigger.
Right. And
It's
see,
very
for
good.
us and our family, well, like my dad didn't ever call himself, I don't even know if I've ever heard him call himself an addict, but he finally called himself an alcoholic like 7 years ago.
Wow.
Like
And so I think,
progress.
right. But I think for us too, everything was focused on the illegal things he done. It was not just pot, like he did other things.
Yeah.
Like there was so much focus on that that it didn't even occur to us that alcoholism was also a thing, even though we knew, like we always saw him drinking too, but
Well, that one's so much more acceptable in our culture.
yeah, it's
Right.
acceptable. And so I think, but knowing, and that also runs on my mom's side of the family. So
Oh my. Wow.
like thankfully among my generation, there's only been one who we've seen openly struggle with stuff, whereas the rest of us seem to be like we learn from watching
The
other
others.
people
And I think
go through it.
Georgette kind of does that.
Yeah.
She learns not from her father's mistakes, but she sees how it affects her. I mean, she's living it, and she knows what it's like to have a parent who isn't an addict. And I think it was really a nice touch that you allowed Ryan, because Ryan is an artist, and you think of an artist and you think of someone who feels things very deeply.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I was picturing him, and having more emotion
Absolutely.
and all of that. But you allowed Ryan to not only be an artist, but he was also a gallerist. Or is that how you say that? A gallerist? He owned a gallery.
He owned an art
And
gallery.
that was a big part of
Mhm.
him and Lillian's life. And then he continued with that, which I was like, okay, you're showing not only an alcoholic, but a functional alcoholic,
Right.
someone who can still
He
keep
kept
a
the
business
gallery going.
going.
Right.
Yeah.
Which was something that Lillian always had a hard time with,
Mhm.
because she's like, how was he able to do this? And he couldn't maintain, the
Yeah.
marriage and stay with us. But
Which is true. My dad had I guess would be a functional addict, functional alcoholic for enough time that like it was not until much later, like in his 40s, late 40s, before it actually all caught up to him. I mean, he had already lost two marriages, but when it started to impact his professional life, it was
yeah,
later.
and probably his health. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I found that just really nice to see represented, because I think a lot of times people think of an alcoholic as the person sitting on the corner, begging for change or something, and you don't think of the person next door, the
Yes.
person that you're
I
going
think
to work with.
I'm
I
so
mean,
glad you're saying that. I think it was really important to me for these issues that come up in the book through decades of time with this family to not be sensationalized, because that's how, and sensational stories are true and real, but the most common experiences, and the same thing I'll say, with Lillian's son, who she places for adoption, who it's also on the book blurb that he comes back eventually looking for his birth mom and his family. And it's all what I have understood to be the most common experiences of these things. So not the most melodramatic, not the most sensational, but just what's the most common way that someone experiences these things within a family context. And a lot of times it is emotionally dramatic, but it is also just things that a lot of people go through often.
you mentioned the time jumping. So the story really does go from before Jet is born until is she in her
An adult.
30s? She's
Probably, yeah, early 30s. I'd have to do the
the
Yeah,
math.
math.
well, it's interesting because when I drafted the book, I was very focused on the relationships and the characters and maybe some of the line level, but I was still figuring out the plot and the story arc, and it wasn't very grounded in time or place. And then I realized, wow, we're spanning a lot of years. And so in my second draft, I really put the years, attached the years to it, and I made Georgette have my same birth year.
Oh,
Just
that's
just
fun.
to make it, because I'm like, okay, we're
That's
gonna
fun.
just grow up together. I also knew I wanted it to end, the whole book to end before the pandemic, and so that all worked out like age
Yeah.
wise. And then it was just a little easier for me to think like what was happening this year. I mean, I still had to research, but
Okay,
what
so
was
I'm like,
happening.
what year was she born again? Because there are a lot of years.
That's why I'm
Was
like
it
trying to think. And it ends
83?
the book ends in 2019. She's born in 86.
Okay, yeah.
86. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
I was
you're
like,
my
you're younger than
cousins.
us.
You're my cousins' ages. Like I'm like, okay, we got this.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm 82.
We're a
You're
little
82,
older.
right?
We're
Yeah.
82 babies, so we're
Yeah,
we're a little
We're close. We're
close
close.
enough.
yes. Yes.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool. I know, the book had a lot of heavy themes,
Mhm,
but there was also a lot of really fun nostalgia thrown in
mhm,
there. And I think
Yes.
that's what makes it kind of not lighthearted, but
mhm,
there was just a lot of happy things happening too. And I think we've talked a lot about the heavy aspects of it. But I mean, you're talking about different,
mhm.
musical artists and TV
Hmm.
shows and, oh, I have to get home so I can go do this. And I think Jet gets her first cell phone and that I
Mhm.
was like, oh, I remember that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it
Thank
was kind of
you.
like a walk down memory
It
lane
really was,
as
which
well.
was fun.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you said that. And it means so much when readers connect with that and feel that because it was so important to me to write a story that was unflinching and honest about
Mhm,
these harder things. But I truly do believe in all of my professional and personal experience that a part of honesty is hope and is
mhm,
levity. And anytime I've worked with a family in crisis, in great, sometimes dramatic, sensational
Yeah.
crisis, there might be a child singing in the kitchen, or there's
mhm,
just still real life happening. And so much of that is what I tried to bring to the page in each character and then in what they go through and what we experience as a reader. I really love when people tell me they laughed in the book because, there, and it's little bits, little moments of lightness and levity and brightness
mhm,
because in the end, all of these characters are trying. They're making effort. They want to love each other. They're going through hard things, but it's also just kind of real life happening around them. And it was so fun to give Georgette my birth year and then be able to think. I really thought about the book A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is
mhm.
referenced early in the Bright Years.
Yeah.
Because when I read that book, the way it transported me to a place and time that was real, it was like this fictional family, but real places in Brooklyn going through real things at a set time. It feels like a time capsule.
Right.
And I just thought, I want to do that. And I want to do that with Fort Worth because so many books are set in New York and Paris. And I know
Mhm,
Texas. So let me pick a
Yes.
Texas place. And, Fort Worth has some great personality to get to dive into. And it was fun for me too, to just kind of grow up with Jet and mine my own memories and then kind
mhm,
of look back up things that I don't remember from when I was 3 or 4 or whatever. And just it's not the main point of the story, but the same way as, the human experience is just kind of our personal experience is front and center, but always in the background, there's
Hmm.
what's happening in our city and in our society and in our country and politics. And so just having those things referenced, I mean, again, it was kind of like I'm going through all these years. The chapter titles are just the year number.
mhm.
And this family's feeling so real to me now. And I'm trying to make them feel real on the page to the reader. And we go through 2001. And how can I not at least mention
Yeah.
that
And you did a
the
very good
power
job
call?
mentioning that. Like the
So
way that
thank
it
you.
played, I was like, oh, that was a really good line.
I mean, yes,
Yeah.
it's just how would this relate to the character whose point of
Mhm,
view we're in? How would they think about how would it impact them or would it not? But, it's just some major things like that make it almost feel almost more memoir-ish in a way because you're just going through time with this family and these
Hmm.
things are in the background of their own personal story and their relationships that they're going through. So, but I appreciate that you said that because again, I was just like, I put some lines in there that I was like, I think this is funny. I hope people laugh. I mean,
We did. Yeah.
we have to be able to hold
Yes.
the light and the dark, the heavy and the light, like all together in one character and in one story. And because that's just what's most true to life.
And
Yeah.
Georgia and her little friend Kendi, and
Hmm.
how
Yes.
they thought that whenever you kissed, you got married.
Yeah. It means you're
and
married. Yeah.
and that was like a thread throughout, and I laughed at that.
Oh, that's
That
good.
I laughed every time I read that. I
Yeah.
was like, I
It's
can see that happening.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was fun to write. You know what I mean? There's just a season where Jet is a child, but also the opening, Ryan is a child, and the book
Mhm.
ends with a child, a different child.
Yes.
And so to me, it was so important to have because I think when we're exploring family dynamics, it's not only the parents and grandparents and previous generations that impact children, but children change their parents' lives.
Yes.
Children are so important. And sometimes that can be they're a mirror and you feel the strain of that. And in a way, it feels harder. But a lot of times, even that is in some way going to help a parent grow. I mean, it's
Hmm.
going to change parents oftentimes for the better, but that doesn't mean it's not a challenge. And that does, so it just, exploring, the importance of children and
Mhm.
childhood without necessarily the book being like all about
Yeah.
kids or having
Right.
a character who's a kid the whole time, but just having that in there kind of underlying was really important to me.
Hmm.
So,
And I had a question. So
yes.
whenever we meet Lillian and Ryan, it's Lillian Wright and Ryan Brighton.
Yes.
And whenever they do get married, they combine their names.
Uh-huh.
What was your like motivation? Like, I see how they're becoming new people,
Mhm.
but is that kind of like the inspiration for that, or
It was multifaceted. And when I started this, I knew the title and I knew the final scene and this play on the word bright. It was just this double meaning of the
Mhm.
word bright. And it's funny, I always say the experience of writing it was like reading because I was discovering, I would sit down at my computer and be like, I can't wait to find out what's going to happen. Um, like reading, but better. Anyways, I knew that was going to be their last name.
Mhm.
And then when I tried to make it, when I thought of making it his last name and her taking it, something about this and the time period they were in, it wasn't very common. I
No,
think it would have been the more common thing for just her to take his name. That was kind of
Hmm.
went
that's why
without
it stuck
question.
out to me. I was like, "Ooh,
And
that's
they
Hmm.
kind of
interesting."
addressed that too because she's like, "Oh, your mom's not going to like this." And then he's like, "She might be more understanding than we think. She
Mhm.
understands." So in a way it was like him cutting ties with that name, with his father, and taking on this thing where really the Ryan and Lillian years are the bright years. They're
Mhm.
the previous generation that they had that name and then, anyways. So it it was multifaceted and I wanted that to be, yeah, their name. And I know they really thought we're starting something new. We can
Mhm.
forget everything from the past, which didn't quite work out for them, as
Hmm.
is often
I
the
think that's real
case.
life, right?
It
You can
is.
try to put the
But
past in the past, but it keeps creeping in.
it is. But then they have this beloved daughter and
Mhm.
it's almost this mix. It's like they can't run away from their past, but they are at the same time starting a new story, writing a new story, creating a new story where the old one is part of it, which I think
Hmm.
they kind of tried to run away from. But yeah, that was a lot of the thought. And so then I had to do it where it was kind of humorous because they have the like Lillian's maiden name was Wright. And at first
Mhm.
they were like, well, the thing to do to combine them, but then it sounds so dumb to have
Yeah.
Brighton, right, Brighton. I think they say, it sounds like the toy,
Bright
the
light.
night light, the
Hmm.
toy, or
Nightlight, yeah.
a night light,
Yeah.
or light bright. Yeah. And so they're like, we can't do that. But they are wanting to do something. They're both just coming from these very broken backgrounds. And hers different from him in that she just had lost. She basically, she didn't have a lot of family when she married him. And then he just had his mom, who he was very close to. But that name was his father's name. And so, yeah, I think they just wanted something that
Something
was
new.
theirs and that was new. Hmm.
Okay, I want to talk about something, and we can cut this if you don't want this in here because I just happened. I was like, just flipped open the book, and this was a scene or there was a moment in this scene that like really stood out, and it's like when they're together for his dad's funeral,
Hmm.
and this is right when like she like
Hmm.
this is the part where he's like, "Alcoholic, is that what
Yep.
I am?"
Hmm.
And she's like, "Isn't it?" He's like, "Yeah." But then she notices the scrap of paper that his dad had kept
Yeah.
Mhm.
with that he had written to his dad, and then that's like kind of makes her look at him and see him as like the child Ryan, the kid that was before this alcoholic that he has become. And I got to tell you, like that, like I'm tearing up now, like seeing it because as much as like I have a better relationship with my father, like there's a part of me that hopes that someday I find something that he kept.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't think that that exists. And part of that too is, and this is not a secret. This is you could Google this and find this. My father did go to prison due to shooting someone over drugs. Like he was high, and
Hmm. Yeah.
thankfully the person lived. Otherwise, he would probably still be in prison. But it's so I'm guessing there's not anything left, from
Yeah.
my grandparents having to pick up the pieces of all of that. But I'm like seeing that. I'm like, I think that's what I don't know how it impacted Ryan to see that, but I know as a
Yeah.
child, I would love to know that my dad had something
Yeah.
of mine, even like, because I do know as much as things are better with my dad, I have said for years, I know that when he dies, there's going to be stuff that I'm
Hmm.
going to have to face that
Hmm.
maybe I don't even know is going to come up.
And I think Ryan had that same moment. Like he
Yeah.
didn't know what to feel. And
Yeah.
he had this thing that his dad had kept all these years, but at the same time his dad didn't really want any part of his life. And
Yeah.
it made you
Right.
look at like his dad a little bit and be like, okay, was he trying to separate
Mhm.
a
Well,
little bit?
I mean, he
And
didn't
you
make
know,
the choice, but I
he didn't make
think,
the choice, but maybe he stood by it and didn't try to include himself in things where he knew that he wasn't
I mean, we'd
wanted.
like to think that. I don't know if we could give that much credit to his dad,
But I think people are
but I think that what
multifaceted and they
yeah, but I think it was good to see that human moment because
Mhm.
he is a villain, but he is complex. As much as we didn't see that, we got to see the evidence of like his choices through Ryan. But I did like that little just that little piece of like there is more to him, that he wasn't the point of the story. And so, but he
Right.
was more, that showed his complexity still.
what's so confounding a lot of times about families where there's an abuser is that, and I think this is why it's so hard for maybe the victims or the survivors to recognize or to walk away from it, is that they still love, especially if it's their
Yeah.
child. The way you'd be so surprised, like, how could he be so horrible to this child? But he has saved this note because probably he hates himself,
Yeah.
and probably the fact a child has this pure kind of innate forgiveness for a parent, like they just
Mhm.
want their parent in whatever condition
Hmm.
their parent's in. So the
And they
fact
don't know
that
any better. They
no,
don't
they don't know
yeah.
any better, and it's heartbreaking to even, but it's so true across the board, and it's that his son, who he had probably already mistreated or mistreated his mom, at least, like around him, would just bring him this note, give him this note where he can't even spell the words correctly, and
Right.
express love to his father in a way that his father might not have known, didn't know how to reciprocate,
Right.
but it meant something to him. And that's always, it's jarring as the child if you grow up like in Ryan's case where his father is now gone and he's finding this thing and he's like, why would he keep this? He was
Hmm.
terrible to me. Like, why, and but it is so complicated because his father probably hated himself and he probably felt some of that pure love from his child,
Hmm.
which he just didn't know how to reciprocate. It was interesting. I had one a bookstore event where an interviewer kind of said, we see a little from Barton, who's Ryan's dad,
Right, Barton.
early on and then later in the book, and he's pretty much just awful everything we see of him. But by the time you take that whole journey with Ryan,
Mhm.
it's enough to just imagine, well, what did he go through as a kid? That's just what we're going to, and again, that question, what's the difference between an excuse and a reason? And it's not to excuse the way that he was, but at the same time, like this, again, we're back to that holding that tension, because at the very same time, in the scene that you read from, I think it's right when she finds the note, right
Yes.
after that, she's kind of hit over the head where she's like, I'm seeing him suddenly, this man that I'm angry with and confused by, I'm all of a sudden I see him as a baby, as a little boy,
Hmm.
as a boy who's, a teenager who doesn't have his dad with him for the Boy Scout thing or whatever it might be. And
Mhm.
she has this moment where she sees him almost outside of time
Yes.
and a holistic person that's so much more than just the one moment that they're inside of. And I think, again, that's why to me, this exploration of the impact of childhood is so important, because when we think of someone as a whole person, their life as a child, and then in the future as an old person, like you mentioned with your dad, like he's just now an old man, it changes the way we might see them. And again, it doesn't
Yeah.
make an excuse. And then also, hopefully, this, the whole thing highlights how important it is to give children safe childhoods
Right.
as
Hmm.
well. It's kind of all of it in there. But yeah, that was, and again, that the scene or the part you read with the finding the note, we see that through Lillian's eyes. And so we don't fully know
Mm-mm.
how it impacted Ryan, except that, like, in those few days, he hadn't been drinking. But then when she finds him drinking, the note is there on the table.
Hmm.
That's all we know. We don't get his particular insight, but we just see her. And then she has that, that moment of seeing him outside of time.
And I think it's right, like what y'all were both saying, that he's having to process it now. Like what I eventually will have to
Mhm.
face that. And I think anytime a parent dies, there's gonna
Right.
be things.
Right.
Right.
And but just to see that, like, and like you said, it made her see, I like that we saw it through her eyes,
Mhm.
because I think in all honesty, like, I think I really appreciate that because as much as like, thank goodness you're not an addict, like, I don't I don't think that, that would be an easy thing to tell from his perspective because honestly, I don't know. I'm gonna walk those shoes at some point.
Mhm.
Not hopefully not in that from an alcoholic of a child alcoholic of an alcoholic, but I think it was done so well, and I think it was such a great moment for her to get to see him
Yeah.
holistically, and it was then when she's like, "Why won't you let me help you? Like, I
Right.
love you."
Well, yes, exactly what you're saying because he's already been struggling for years with
Mhm,
alcohol, and
Mhm.
so then you can almost forget, oh my gosh, this is generational.
Yeah.
mhm,
Like you are an alcoholic, but you are also the child of an alcoholic, and
mhm,
there's just a lot to unpack there.
mhm. But it was such
We
a
all
beautiful scene, I
carry
love
we
that.
all carry the stuff with us that our parents carried and maybe they didn't know how to deal with, and their
Right.
parents carried and didn't know how to deal with because
Mhm,
that
Right.
just gets passed down until
Hmm.
someone finally deals with it.
mhm.
Yeah.
So everybody
And
go
I
to
feel
therapy.
like us millennials, we are the ones that are trying to deal and end the generational curses.
There's a lot. It seems like there's a lot more openness and honesty, at least.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I say that a little hesitantly because with this issue in particular, there's still a lot of people that
There's
are
still
struggling
yeah.
with alcoholism behind closed doors,
Mhm.
and there's shame and there's confusion and it's not spoken about, but still I think it's spoken about more than it was in previous generations. And
100%,
like we
yeah.
were saying earlier, take away the veil, take away the secrecy, take away, and it does add some power. It's not the only thing that's needed, but it does give someone power to just be out in the open and just say
Mhm.
this is what's happening. It's interesting, I had someone tell me who read the book, I met her at an event and she held the book to her chest. She was starting to cry before she even started to talk to me. And she just said, she was older. I mean, she was a full adult. She said, my dad's an alcoholic. And she said, but I never tell people that. And the reason this book meant so much to me is because he's my favorite person. And she said, like, they're very close. He's an active alcoholic. It's been hard their whole lives and it's brought a lot of pain. But she just was like, I don't tell people because I don't want them to put him in a box and
Mhm.
just assume this is what you were saying earlier, the picture of someone who's drunk on the side of the road. And it's just,
Right.
that's not the most, and that was, I really wanted to take those, that does happen, but I wanted to disillusion us, or what's the word I'm looking for? Disabuse us of that notion that that's what
Mhm.
alcoholism and adoption and always looks like this really dramatic thing when sometimes it doesn't.
Mhm. And I
Even though
think you
it
did a
is.
good job of that. And I think it
Mhm.
also showed because both sides of my family were quote unquote good families. Like my dad was encouraged to go to college. Like my mom's side where there's stuff like my mom was not first generation college. I don't even know if she was second. It might have been like it was
Mhm.
not like you said, the person sitting on the street. It was normal families that were trying to support their kids and then still this stuff happens. And I think
Right.
it's important
It can happen to
like
anybody.
right, I think it's
Yes.
important to pull back the veil because same thing
Mhm.
with Lena. Lena's from a family that was always trying to do right by it wasn't like, oh, they're just these people over here, just those, that doesn't happen to normal people. No, these are normal people
This happens to
that
everyone. I mean,
and
that's
that it's been
unfortunately.
hidden.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the more people are open about that and the more people are able to say what you just said, like, this could happen to anyone, this could
Mhm.
happen to me, this could happen, then it's almost less likely to happen. I feel like it's sometimes
Yeah.
the pride of like, that would never happen to me. That's such
Yeah.
a different. And then when it does, you're so ashamed because you had
Mhm.
these judgments.
Mhm.
But just that, sure, we all have the proclivity
Mhm.
to fall into whatever it is. And hopefully having that kind of humility and knowing that that could happen is a
Mhm.
bit of a guard against it.
Right.
Um,
It is.
yeah.
I think it should be, and that's the like, I do think, like you said, it's still a very people are ashamed
Could
of
be
it,
taboo. Hmm.
but it's and I think that's I hope we're getting better because feel like with mental health, like, our generation
Yeah.
is, like, really like, "Okay, let's not hide the fact anymore. Let's stop hiding our struggles." But I agree, this is still one where people don't know how to handle it, and I think that also comes down to not every it's hard for we know this is an adult making a choice, but then there's, like, but there is some sort of disease
Mhm.
element or
Right.
some there like you said, not an excuse, but a reason. There's reasons behind
A
why
lot
people
of it.
start the
To
start
drink.
drinking, start doing stuff. And there's, it's really easy to be like, well, I don't get it. So like you need to just figure it out and get over it. And it's like, well, it's more complicated than that. And you definitely showed that
with all of the characters, not
with
just
all of the
with the
characters,
addiction, but
the
with
complexities of humans.
Shauna and
Mhm.
her husband passed away, and
Mhm.
Kendi is dealing with life without a father while
But for
he's
a
best
different
friends
reason than
with
Georgette. Yeah.
Jed,
Mhm.
Right.
who has an absent father.
Right.
So it was just really well done. All the characters I felt were really well done. Um,
Mhm.
and before we go, I do have to say, all of this book it takes place in Texas.
Mhm.
And it felt like it was so much like Texas.
Mhm.
I mean, we had
Good.
Buc-ee's in there. We had Bluebell ice cream,
Sundance
um,
Square.
Uh-huh.
Sundance Square. What else was
Yes.
Big Tex? Howdy,
Yes.
folks.
Yes.
Mhm.
I was going
Um,
through it and I'm like, oh, Texas. And it felt like a little like
well,
nuggets.
was Billy Bob's in it and
Billy
Joe
Yep.
T.
Bob was in it.
Garcia's?
Uh-huh. Yeah, they went a lot of places. I mean, you go through these highlights of um it's the whole book spans 60 years, though again, because we have Ryan as a child at the beginning, we jump 20 years, but then you
Yeah.
experience 40 years of life with this one family, zooming in on these certain times. So they made their way around Fort Worth. Yeah.
I love
So
it.
you are,
Fort Worth and several other cities that
Yeah.
come up.
and
Yeah,
they went to
Texas
Pillager
cities.
Canyon.
Yep. And then
Um,
Kendi lives in Houston for a while. Yeah.
Mhm.
so I was like, you get
Sorry,
to
what were you
see
gonna
a
say?
big swath of Texas. So if anybody's looking for a book that
Mhm.
talks about Texas, this is a good one because you'll get to hear all the different little places and
Mhm.
all that. That was fun. That was a
Or
Yeah.
fun
a
reading
local author
experience.
you wanna support if it's on your reading challenges, like,
Yep.
"Hello, we've got one
Yes.
right here." So, I have to know, like, are you already working on the next book? Like, do you have some stuff in the fire? Like, we wanted like, this was I cannot believe this was a debut.
Thank
I mean, I feel like I've read a lot of debuts and I mean, it reads like you have just been writing forever. And so I need to know, are we gonna get more books? Because I want more from you. I need more from you.
I just sent my next manuscript to my editor last week, so it's
Yay!
Yay.
Congratulations.
written, and
Congratulations.
we'll see how many edits we have to do. Depending on that, it would hopefully be out later next year. It's another multi-generational family
Ooh,
Oh,
saga.
yay. Oh,
I
yay.
love multi-generational
I do
family
too.
sagas. Like I'm a
But
sucker for those, always have been. So
Mhm.
count me in.
I
I'm
Me
agree.
ready for
too.
As
it.
a reader, yes, I love reading them too.
Okay, cool.
Is
What's
that your
that?
favorite type of book?
It's a good question because for the past like 2 years, I've made a point to read so many of them since
Hmm.
I'm writing them now. But my favorite novel of all time is The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver.
Oh, I have it. I've
I
never
have
read it
it.
though.
I just
Oh,
got it
read
because my
it.
daughter's like, I think she had her in third grade and fourth grade. She always talks about her, and on
Oh.
Facebook, she's always like, "This is who you need to go read." And so I finally got the book, but I haven't read it. But
Which one did you get? Did you get Demon Copperhead?
I got Poisonwood
Oh,
Bible
you got
because she
Poisonwood.
said that.
Okay.
She said that's the best one.
I'm partial to that one as well, though Barbara Kingsolver's prose, nothing can compare. I'm such like I feel like, again, I had no training or education in writing other than just reading. And so many poets and that kind of prose that is not poetic, but lyrical at least.
Mhm,
And just you can't, it's almost like you're eating it, drinking it. Like you just
mhm.
can't get it comes off the page like silk. Like I just love that. And that's how she writes, but these really complex, deep characters. And so the Poisonwood Bible is, I guess it's not really multi-generational. It does cover a wide period of time,
But
but
I mean, that still
anyway, it's a
counts.
family saga told with multiple points of view, and that's my
Okay.
favorite book. So I guess it's fair to say yes. And then similar, Dani Shapiro, she has a novel that's also family, multiple points of view, and she also writes memoir. And then Maggie O'Farrell, who is historical, and I'm not normally a big historical girly, but I loved Hamnet, and that made me like read. I read her memoir, and so I think I will read pretty widely. Like you were saying earlier, I don't do really anything supernatural, but again, it's like, and I actually don't do that many like heart poundy books. Occasionally I will, and I get it's such an intense, I'm a very deep feeler, if you couldn't tell by reading my book. So I'll just be like, it really impacts me. So occasionally if the premise is I'm like, I've got to read it, but that hardly ever happens. So, but yeah, so I think I like right now I'm reading The Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong that just recently came out. It's the current Oprah pick.
Ooh.
And his writing, again, I think so much is like, if it's well written, I'll read anything.
I'm
It's
kind of
not,
laughing as you're saying that because I figured out finally on audio how to bookmark. So every time that I was like, ooh, that sounded so nice, I would bookmark it. But I have so many lines from your book that I wrote down. I think it was, one of them was, sometimes a woman's choice is between impossible and impossible and impossible, and she just has to make it. I was like, oh my gosh.
yeah. Thank you.
So
that means so much to me.
You're doing that exact same thing.
That's good. I'm glad, because that's what I love to read. And I did have a point where, when you start thinking about publishing, as I was doing edits, I just was thinking the most helpful thing for me to think, I don't know if it sounds weird, but it was just like, do I want to read this? If I feel like it's boring or it's flat, then I can't expect a reader. And I can't, all I can think of is like, is this compelling to me? Do I want to know this character? I really am I'm writing what I love and hoping that, other people are drawn to the same thing, which is great to hear that you had that experience with it.
So I have to tell y'all, because y'all were talking about the Lost Children archive. And while I was looking to get that, and you're going to laugh at this. So then when I went, Amazon gave me the option to get my Audible for 99 cents a month for 3 months. So I got it for 90. So now I got it. But now it's telling me my storage is like, anyway, but I had to tell you all that because we're talking about different books and stuff. And so I'm like, hey,
add that one to the list.
I'm not a big rereader, but I've been talking about it so much as like, I started writing after I read that book. I should reread it. I haven't read it in 5 years. I wonder what it would be like. But if you read it, I'm sure you'll see what I mean. And just that.
No, but I'm excited about that. And I'm excited to read the Poisonwood Bible now because my mom gave it to me years ago. She's like, here, I read this. Here, you can borrow it. And
that one, it's a thicker book. It's a longer book. It's not meant to be read fast, but it is such a rich, it's a feast. It's such an experience. And when you come to the end of that, you truly feel like change. I mean, I just felt like I just went on this epic journey with this family, and I learned and I changed and I saw so much. So it's beautiful.
I love it. Yeah. I'm excited. So
I need to read it. Big books usually scare me a little bit. And so I'm like, oh, can I do it?
You can. I think it's actually, she has it in 3 or 4 parts. It's kind of like book 1, book 2.
Okay.
So read it,
split it
and
up that
take
way.
your time. I took my time the first time reading it. I think it's better that way. But yeah, I could just talk about I've been doing, sitting at Barnes and Nobles doing signings and stuff. And one of the booksellers came over to me and he was like, not only are you selling your book, but you're selling other books too. I was by the door and people were coming in. I'm like, hey, what do you like to read? And then they would say a genre. And if it wasn't anything related to the Bright Years, I'd be like, oh, have you checked out Frederick Bachman? Have you checked out, I just start.
Oh my gosh.
Like, no, anyway, it was so funny. I was like, well, I'll come back here if I ever want to work at a bookstore.
I love it. Yeah.
That's what we were
I love reading.
Joking at our book club with Neighbor Books. We were talking about, there's a bookstore in Scotland where you get to volunteer and you run the bookshop, and then they have like little things set up for you, and it's like an Airbnb, but you're volunteering at the bookshop. And I was like, that would be my dream. And I told him, I was like, if I ever get to volunteer at your bookshop, like sign me up if you ever do that, because I would totally do it. He said he was thinking about it because I was like, hey, Christmas time, my family does robotics. Yeah. And that is like when it all kicks off. So I was like, hey,
I'm sure that might be, thinking about it, I'm like, that might be hard to manage, like to be a manager. It's a different thing. But I'm like, ooh, sign me up.
But
too.
it sounds fun, right?
That.
Let's go work at a bookstore.
Someone starts a bookstore that's like volunteer run. Yes.
Yeah.
It'll be fun.
I love it. Cool.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we will definitely see you.
It was such a delight.
I'm just so glad that Leyna was like, we got to read this book. I'm not even kidding. I'm not exaggerating. Top 2 book of the year. Like you tie with I don't remember what the other one was, but it was another author that we talked to. But for real,
Alive and Breathing.
Yes, 2 books that Leyna found you guys. Sorry, got a cat here now. He's been waiting his turn for his spotlight on the podcast. But for real, like, I am just in shock. Like, two people. So Leyna just needs to pick out all my books, first of all. And I cannot wait to hear you announce your next book, because I will be like pre-ordering that like nobody's business, because everyone should read The Bright Years. I think it, like you said, it's an emotional book, but it's funny too. It has great moments. It's perfect for millennials. You will identify with characters and you will feel like you were there, because you were there. And Texans, especially DFW area, you got to read it. I'm just telling you, like, it's a book. Like, I was at a training this week moving to a new school next year. And we did like one of those scavenger hunts. It was like, find someone who owns more books than streaming services. And I'm like, come on over. And it's like, what was the last book you couldn't put down? And I wrote this on like probably 20 people's sheets. So just know 20 people have it written on their sheet that I'm like, y'all better all go home and read it. And I made best buddies with one of the library aides that's going to be at my school. And we were already exchanging books, and I told her to. So
and
anyway.
I didn't know you were a teacher. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love it. And as a debut author, even with a major publisher, I'm so grateful. I really think word of mouth and readers who are passionate about the story are everything. And they're just the reason why other readers are discovering it. And I'm just trusting that it will find the right people that need it, or would relate to it. And LJ, thank you for sharing some of your own story too, and just how you relate to it. I know that's always just,
I'm pretty open, but I get really excited and I know Leyna too, like when stuff that we understand and know that other people don't is just represented in a way that we can't even put it into words.
Yes.
Like you put it so beautifully and in such a way that we're like, yes, I feel seen, I feel understood. And I feel like if someone reads it, then they can better understand part of my experience. So
I love that. I think when writing and publishing are different things. You can write without publishing. And when I pursued publishing, I just kept saying, I want someone to feel seen. I want someone to feel less alone. That to me is why I would share the work. And like what you're saying, I've had the experience as a reader many times where something gets into something in a way I can't explain, and I'll give the book to someone else because I'm like, this is my experience.
Right.
So just read the book and then we can talk. And it's so helpful. It's such an interesting thing, books, because they are an individual experience and a shared experience, and they're so unique in that way. So I love that. So thank you both so much for having me.
It was very fun.
And we have to come meet you at Neighbor Books.
Yes,
we'll be
in July.
July 12th, Neighbor Books, 5 p.m. is when the signing starts. And then at 6:30, there's going to be a Q&A. So we'll just put a plug in for that.
Yes, we will.
We'll see you there.
Thank you. Yes. I have events listed on my website, which is just myname.com. So it's easy to find if there are any other people looking for events to come to. So
love it.
Yeah. Thank you.
And there was also swag on your website too.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's so funny. That kind of happened accidentally. I had tote bags made that I was just going to do as like gifts and raffle stuff just at events. And then my friend who helped design them was like, just link it on your website in case anybody wants. There's a Cowtown Cup tote bag, which is a fictional coffee shop in the book in Fort Worth. And then there's the Sundance Gallery, the SG, they call it, which is Ryan's art gallery. And so we have tote bags for both of those. And there's 3 items on there. There's a Zach and the Blacktoppers t-shirt, which is the band that comes up in the book. You'll have to read it. We didn't talk about that, but it's so funny. Yeah. So I don't really expect that seems to be so much more. This is more of a literary fiction. It seems to be so much more of like a commercial thing. Like maybe rom-coms have merch, but once I created
those, cute.
She was like, you have to at least link it. So it is there. Yes.
I love it. Love it.
You were saying her website.
Oh yeah. It's sarahdamoff.com. All right, guys, you have to go there and get the
H.
swag. And you got to, yes, Sarah with an H, that is important. And you got to go check out the swag.
And also, the swag. Yeah. There's also events and just other writing. This podcast, I'm sure, will eventually put a link up there for
Thank you.
For the media. Yeah. So
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. We'll say goodbye to everybody.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank
you.
So thank you for listening to More Than a Book Club podcast. We are recorded and produced in McKinney, Texas.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening.